Hello everyone, welcome to Geeks for Geeks Python channel and welcome to this live session of this series whose topic is socket programming, right? Okay, so we will begin in a while. Let me just test the audio. Okay, so we will begin Yes, so the audio and video seems to be fine. So welcome to this session. So this is part 4 of our series uh, based on socket programming in Python. And in this part, we will explore how to send objects in uh, in sockets. Okay, so the implementation will be in Python, and in this tutorial, we will learn about how to send objects related data using sockets, right? So in the previous lecture, we learned about how can we send file related data over sockets. Okay. So in the last lecture, what we implemented was a client and a server, and the client was just sending a textual data, right, over the sockets to the server, right? So we had a text file, and we had some content in the text file. So I'll just quickly go through the recap of what we did in the last session. So we implemented a client like this. So this was our client. It was very simple client. The idea was to just show you how the client can send textual file related data, or not textual data but file related data, or how can file IO work between client and server using sockets, right? So the implementation was very simple. We just created a client, simple client. It was just connecting till it was sending data, and then the connection was closed, right? So we defined the socket, we defined the port numbers, we connected to the local host or the local IPv4 address on the which the router assigns us, right? So that IP we chose. We opened a file. So this basically sample.txt was the text file which the client was trying to send. Okay, and this was recv.txt which the server would receive and then save. Okay, now ideally client and server are different machines, but because of sake of implementation, we are doing it on the same machine. Okay, so you can if you have any doubts related to how we define client and server and everything, you can go back to part 3, part 2 and part 1. You will understand everything. Okay, in part 1 we have defined how to implement what is client server architecture. In part 2 we also implemented some threading concepts in part 1. Then part 2 we discussed about some parameters related to sockets, and then in the third part we discussed about this file IO happening between sockets. Okay, so this was sample.txt which the client was trying to send to server, and this was recv which the server will save to. Okay, the content of sample.txt will get saved to recv.txt. Okay, so this was my code for client, and this was my code for my server. Okay, so what client was doing, client was just simply opening a file, and it was sending 1024 bytes or 1 KB at a time. Okay, so while it had data, while it could read data in the sample.txt, it was just sending the data, right? And at the end the connection was closed. And at the server end, we just created a simple server. Okay, the file has to be opened. In a while loop, it was just listening to the data it is receiving, and once all the data has been received, it writes it to the file. It closes the file, it closes the connection, and it breaks out of the true while true, right? So that is what we implemented in the last session. And if you see one thing that we have have not taken into consideration is the file type is sample.txt. Okay, so what happens if we have, let's say, a CSV file? Okay, so CSV file, we will implement an example using CSV file in this tutorial. Okay, so let's just execute once what we discussed in the last session. This was our sample.txt, and this was our recv.txt. As you can see, it has no content as of now, recv. So let's execute the server once. So py server.py. So my server is running now, and let's execute the client on the second script. So on the second terminal, client.py. And once you execute the client.py, the file, it says that file has been copied successfully. Okay, so now if I go to the location, if you see, recv has the content of content of sample.txt, right? Initially recv was empty, sample.txt was having all the content which the client had to send, right? But now after I execute the scripts, client sends the content of sample.txt and it gets saved into recv.txt, right? So what in this example we have taken example of .txt file. Okay, let's take an example where a user tries to send a CSV file. Okay, so let's take an example. So what I'll do is I'll take a sample CSV file, which is let's say this one. I'll copy this and I'll paste it to my folder which is containing the code. Okay, so here is my folder which is containing the code. I'll paste the CSV file here. Okay, so let's say the client is now trying to send the content of this turnover.csv into some file, into some CSV file. Okay, so the client is trying to send the content of turnover.csv. Server will receive it and it will store it in some file. Okay, so let's create an empty CSV file over here. Or I don't think we need to do it. Python will automatically create a file if it's not created. Okay, so I have now, instead of sending the sample.txt, my client will send turnover.txt. Okay, so I'll have to change in the client. So instead of this open sample.txt, I will have turnover.txt .csv, right? So this becomes my client. Now the client is opening the turnover.csv file. It is reading the data in it byte by byte, and till there is data, it is sending the data to server. Okay, on the server side, now I will not open recv.txt. I'll have to name it into some CSV file. So I'll name it as recv.csv. Okay, recv.csv. So now the client, instead of the server will not work with the txt file, it will open or create a CSV file, and while it receives the data from the client side, it will just write the data. What it receives from the client, it will write the data, it will close the file. Okay, so at the end of the execution, I should have recv.csv inside the folder which contains the same content as inside the file which is sent by client, which is turnover.csv, right? So I'll save both the files. Let's run it once again. So this is my terminal. I run my server first. Okay, and in the second terminal I run my client, and again on the server side it says file has been copied successfully, server is closing the connection. Okay, so now let's go to the folder. And yes, so now if you see, I have a recv.csv file. So I'll open both turnover and recv to see if the contents have been copied successfully or not. So this is my turnover.csv file. It has columns like satisfaction level. It is a data set basically. So this is my turnover.csv file. Now let's check the content of recv.csv file. Yes. So now if you see the content of turnover.csv file and the recv.csv file, both are same. Okay, so that means our data has been copied successfully, right? So if you see, this is my recv file and this is my turnover file, right? So client was sending the turnover.csv file and the server received recv.csv file. So everything has taken the file communication between the client and the server has taken place in a correct manner, and the server has received the files, right? Okay, so this is basically our discussion based on how file can be sent, or how file communication can happen between client and server, right? Now, okay, so this is not limited to just txt files or csv files. This is also applicable for images, right? Because you can also read images in bytes form, and then you can send those the client can send the image data byte by byte, and then the server can receive the same data byte by byte, and then you can just accumulate those bytes to form a image. Okay, and now there are tons of python libraries which will help you to accomplish this task, or you can also do it in the same way in which we have done with the txt file or csv files, right? So what you need to do is just you need to open, so let me close these two files. Yeah. So what changes would become is, in the client side, you are using this open, right? So here you define which file you are opening. So there you can choose any file, you can read it and read bytes from it, and then you can send those bytes. At the server side, you have to just assemble those bytes and then create an file object out of it, right? So if you perform all the operations correctly, if even if you have an image, that image also can be transferred from client to the server side, right? So this is how files can be transferred between client and server, right, using sockets. Okay, so now the file communication using sockets has been done. I think it was clear to you, and you can also perform all the additional capabilities in terms of threading and everything, which we have discussed in the part one, right? So all these things we can implement in this, and we can even make it more complicated, but that is not the scope of discussion for this tutorial, for this session, right? We are trying to implement uh, file communication between sockets. Okay, so now we have discussed, so we have some background as to, we have some like basic recap of what we did in the last session. So now we will proceed to this tutorial's topic, this session's topic, which is sockets in Python. And in this session, we will be focusing on sending objects using Python. Okay, now what are objects? First we need to understand what are objects. Okay, so let's say you have a class. Okay, let's say you have a class A, and so if you know about classes, it's very good. If you don't know, just understand it's basically a blueprint of something which basically gives you the functionality to implement multiple versions of the same code. Okay, so you would have studied about the basic example, like if it's a class of dog, then you can have different breeds and different names of dogs and different kinds of food habits and all those stuffs inside the class defined, right? So I'll not go into details about what the class is. I will just keep my discussion about the objects. Okay, So if you have some class and you have some methods inside the class, so like method 1, method 2, then you instantiate an object of this class, right? So I'll write a equals a. Now what this means is, this is an object. A is my object, okay? And A represents all the functionalities which are defined inside the class A, right? To speak generally, A can give me access to some variables which are defined inside A, and the methods, okay? So I can call A dot method 1, and this will execute the method 1 defined inside the class A. If I type a dot method 2, then this will execute the second method, right? So A is my object which represents my class A, right? So class is something inside which basically represents a blueprint of something, and using an object which is basically instantiation of the class. So using the objects, you can use different methods and different parameters and different properties which are defined inside your class, right? So even when you do something like sockets dot sock dot socket something dot something, right? So that is basically like you are creating an object of something, okay? To just to work with that, just to give you the interface, so that objects basically gives you the interface to interact with the class methods and class properties, okay? So that is the basic idea of object. Now why are we sending objects using Python? That is the second thing which we need to understand. So why do we need to send objects using Python, right? So we have seen how can we send file related data using Python, right? Now let's say you have server, okay, and let's say you have client, okay. Now on the server side you have hosted some files, okay. Let's say on the server side you are running 3 files, okay, uh, which is 1.py, 2.py, 3.py, okay. So there are some files, okay. Or let's not even take the example of files. So let's say on the server side you have incorporated some machine learning model, okay. Okay, and the clients basically need this sorry just give me a moment. Yes, so let's say you have some scripts running on the server side, and the clients basically want to interact with this models, okay. So what basically I mean to say is that on the server side you will have some scripts, right, to run these models. So let's say this is let's say it is using something like some file, okay. So some file dot py. So let's say this models file is using this sum file, right? So it is using this sum file. So it will definitely need the classes and the functions defined inside the ML model, right? And it needs to convey the parameters of the model to the client, okay. So if you would have studied about machine learning models, there basically you have different models, okay, which basically stores all these parameters like training history and different stuffs related to different parameters related to accuracy and all those things, okay. Deployment related data, deployment graphs, okay. So these kind of stuffs are stored inside models. So what are these models? These models are nothing but objects, Okay, now let's say you want to communicate these models to the client side. So then this model is not a file, right? The main difference between objects and a file is that the file is basically just a text file, right? If you see this is a file, this is recv.txt. You can read the content of this and then you can send the content. But objects are basically your data structures. It basically means that you are using the you are basically interacting with the structures defined inside the programming language, right? So an object can also be like dictionary, an object can be like counters, an object can be like different instantiations objects which you get after you define or after you instantiate classes, right? So what I'm trying to say over here is we will definitely understand how these objects work. Okay, so what I'm trying to say over here is these objects are very different from files. Okay, so there has to be some way in which you can communicate these objects directly to the client, or you can receive from client to the server. It basically it has to the communication has to happen from either client to server or from server to client, but there has to be some way in which these properties can be communicated, right? If you would have heard about JSON, so JSON we use as a deserialized and serialized thing to communicate between web pages and servers. Okay, so same way for communication of objects between server and client using sockets, we have to come up with some way. Okay, okay. So now, so let's say even if you want to send some variable value, okay, so you can't send the variable value which is I mean you can definitely, if the variable is just a string, you can definitely pass the content of that from the client to the server. But let's say if it's a dictionary, so let's say if it's like a is a key and its value is variable 1, and b is a key and its value is variable 2. Now this is an object. Now this is not a file, and this is also this cannot be directly sent to the using sockets. Why? Because this is an object. It already contains some variables inside them, right? Let's say my variable 1 is 20 and variable 2 is 30. So my object becomes a key holds the 20 value and b key holds the 30 value. So this is not basically a string thing, right? It's a dictionary. So this is an example of object. So we need to come up with something so that we can send these object related data, okay, from client to the server. So one most basic example of this is to just think about if you have a class and if you instantiate an object from that class, how can you transfer this object directly from client to the server so that the client can make use of whatever was defined in the class, right? Okay, so why it needs to be used, that basically all depends on how you want to use it. Okay, so I'll not go inside how you want to implement it, but that is definitely a use case in which developers sometimes want to directly send objects. So they have a need where they want to directly communicate, uh, they directly want to send these objects from client to server or server to client using the socket thing. Okay, so without any further delay, let's so we have seen what an object is. It will become more clear once we execute the program. Just make a distinction between the file object communication and this object communication. In file communication, in transferring files between client and server, it was different. We had a file and we had some data inside file. We read the data from the file and we transferred it from client to server. Now when we come to this sending objects between client and server, we will see first how object is obviously an object is different from the file, because an object is defined programmatically, right? It is not like a static data which is stored on the memory, right? Either on the client side or on the either on the or on the server side, right? So it's not a static thing. So we need to come up with something so that we can send these objects which can be executed either on the client side or on the server side, right? Okay, so let's jump. I'll open one of the folder just to execute what we are doing. Okay, so let's go with new folder. Let's go with tutorial 3. Okay, so I'll create a file which basically contains my object. Okay, so let me first contain the object. Okay, so I'll name this file as, okay, we will save it. Let's save this file as processdata.py, right? Oh, I'm just naming it. You can name it anything. Where is my folder? Yes, tutorial 3. Processdata.py. So this file will basically, we will define the object. What is my object which I need to send, which the client want to send from client want to send to the server. So let's say I have a class process data and I have two functions inside. So first one is the constructor. Don't worry about all these things if you are not able to understand what is this class, how is this class defined, what is this init function doing inside the class. Don't worry, we will get into it. So data equals, as of now, just hello, just follow along. Hello function has been called. Okay, so let's do it like this, and it's a function. So I'll give self.data equals data. Okay, we will understand all of this. As of now, just follow. And I have a method. So as we discussed in the class definition, what is a class? A class is just a blueprint which contains some methods, and then we use objects, we create objects for the classes, and then we interact with objects to implement whatever is written inside class. Okay, as simple as that. So now let's name another method which is hello, and inside this I'll just print self.data. Okay, so this is my class. My class has just two functions. Okay, one is hello and one is the constructor. Now what is the constructor? Constructor is, it will be executed whenever you create an object for process data. Okay, so let's say I create an object A and I create process, I instantiate my class process data. Okay, and now after I instantiate an object of this class which is process data, I can call my hello function using A. How can I call the hello function? A dot hello. As simple as that. Okay, as soon as, so what is this init function? It's a constructor. So as soon as you call this process data, this initialize function will be called, and the data parameter will be set to hello function has been called. So this is self. So this data, whatever is passed into this constructor, it will be set to this data variable. Okay. Now, the second function that I have inside my class is hello, which basically just prints the value of self.data. Whatever data you pass from constructor, it gets stored in the data variable and it is accessed inside the hello function using self.data. Okay. So as when I create process data class, when I call process data class, it basically calls the constructor, and the constructor sets the value of data passed into the self.data variable, and inside the hello I just print that self.data is what is the content of self.data. So now to call this hello function, I will call a.hello, right? A.hello. So if you just call, if you write a.hello, hello will be executed. So let's save this file and run this. So cd, I hope it's visible. So cd tutorial, I am coming to my directory py process data.py, and as when I run it, it says hello function has been called. Why? Because I created an object for process data. Now a is my object. Okay, and using that a object I call hello function of the a class. Okay, I can create more than one object. I can also create b equal to process data, and I can also write b dot hello. I can write the same thing, right? If I run it once again, okay, this is not the terminal. If I execute once again, it will call the hello function 2 times. Now process, all these objects are basically the blueprint of this class. Okay, so if you want to call the class for different objects with different data, then you can create multiple objects for that class. Okay, as of now it's not needed, so I just wanted to show you how you can create the object using class and how you can call different methods using the class. Okay, using the object of the class. Okay, so this is my class, and this is what I want to communicate from client to server. Okay, so the client wants to send this process data class over uh, sockets, right? So now we will come to the socket part. So I'll create a new file for that. Empty module. Yes, so let's name it server.py, because this will be my server. So server.py, is it correct? Yes, server.py. Okay, so now I'll code what is the logic inside server. So simply this is very simple. We just want to communicate this basic object thing from client to the server. So it will just read till it receives this object. Okay, now what is this pickle? I have imported this pickle library. So pickle is basically to serialize and deserialize these objects, okay, in bytes format. So if you see, we have in our previous tutorials, we used to convert the string from string format to bytes format, right? So that we can send it over sockets to the server. Same way pickle is used to convert these objects into bytes format. Okay, as simple as that. So host, define my host. I'll give it the local local IP address, right? Local host IP address. I will define my port. So let's take it to be 65439. Okay, let's give ACK text equals text received. So I'll just uh, print this once I receive the text. RECEIVED. This is my acknowledgement text. So import socket and pickle. So that is already okay. Import is done. Okay, now I'll print server is listening. Okay, so now, okay, let's change the port to be okay, you can give it any number. I'll just change the port to be 50,007. Okay, because 65,000 is too close to the limit. Okay, to the maximum number of ports that are available. So let's keep it 50,000. Okay, so host, I can also use this. Instead of this, I'll just use localhost. Same as 127.0.0.1. That means we are running on the home local IP address, right? Okay, so now I'll create the socket object s equals socket dot socket, as we have done in the previous lectures. So this takes two parameters, socket dot af underscore inet, comma, socket dot sock underscore stream, right? So socket object is done. Now I'll bind s dot bind, as we have done in the previous lectures sessions. S dot bind, and this takes a tuple, right? So inside the tuple, what should come? Host, comma, port. I close the bind, and then I'll do s dot listen. How many clients you want to listen from? So I'll just give one because we have only one client. Now I'll create con comma addr equals s dot accept. Okay, so I block the server for any connection. So I accept, and I'll print connected by, and I'll give addr connected by comma addr. Okay, so accept is done, connected by addr once the connection is done. So now I'll receive the data. Data is con dot recv, and recv takes a parameter. So let's give it 1024. Okay, for simplicity, we will also understand in the next lecture why we need to do some modifications in this. We have already discussed this with string data in the second lecture, but we'll again recap it in the next lecture. Okay, so as of now, we just want to implement, so we will just see. Okay, so data underscore variable. Now this is the object which I receive. Okay, so pickle, because pickle will deserialize, dot loads, and I will give data. Okay, so whatever object the client sends, I will deserialize it, I mean convert it from byte to object using pickle. That is what pickle is used for. Okay, so now once I receive everything, connection dot close, I mean it definitely will receive everything, that's why I'm closing the connection. Now I will receive this class as the object from client, right? So I just want to execute uh, the hello method. So data variable dot hello, right? Now this is very powerful. This means that you have transferred this class from the client to the server. Okay, and on the server side you can call functions from of that variable, right? This is very powerful. So print, I'll just print data receive received from client. Okay, that's it. This is my server side. What I have done on server side, uh, okay, I don't need this acknowledgement text because I have not used it anywhere. So I have defined the host port, server is listening, created a socket object, binded it to host and port, listening to one connection, accept the request from the client, then receive the data, receive the object, deserialize it using Pickle, store it in data variable, close the connection, and then print the hello, execute the hello function of this process data, because client will send this class process data, right? So I have to confirm whether the data variable is correct or not. So that is why I have done data variable dot hello. If you remember, we executed process data a equals process data, and then we executed a dot hello, right? Same thing we are doing on the server side, because client is sending this whole class. So I am receiving pickle.load data, reading the data from client, storing it in data variable, and then calling the data variable dot hello, so that if this executes, I should see this line, which is hello function has been called, right? Hello function executes and it prints the self.data, right? Self.data is hello function has been called, right? So this line should be printed. If this line prints, then I am sure that my server has my client has successfully transferred the object from client to server, right? Okay, so I will save this file server. Now I'll implement the client side. I'll create a new file, Python. Okay, let's implement the client side now. Let's save this as client.py. Okay, so what I need to do inside the client, I will import socket and pickle. Pickle I need on the client side to serialize it, right? Now from process data, I will import the class process data. So from the process data.py file, I am importing process data, which is the class. Class is process data, right? So I have imported that class because I need to send that class as an object, right? So now host is, again I'll define localhost. Port I'll define same thing as 50,007. This was same as server side, because as of now we have only both the things are running on the same machine, right? So now s equals, now I'll create the socket object, socket, and inside this I will create socket dot af underscore inet comma socket. If you are not familiar with any of these, I would suggest you to go through previous parts. There we have discussed everything in detail. Socket.stream. Okay, so my socket object is done. Now s.connect, I will connect to my server, and inside the connect I should give a tuple which is host comma port. Okay, so now connect is done. Now I will create a variable. I will instantiate an object. Okay, so my object is process data. So now my process data is a class. So I have just instantiated that class. Okay, so the same thing that we did over here, same thing I'm doing here. So this variable is now an object, right? Variable. Yes. So my class is instantiated. Now what I need to do is data equals pickle dot dumps, and I will give variable. So this will serialize my object, class object, into bytes. Okay, and then I will just send this data. Once I send, I will close the connection because I just need to see, that's all. And I will print data send to server. Okay, so that's pretty much it for server, for client. So localhost port, so create the socket object, connect to that variable, instantiate the class, from process data import process data. That means from process data.py import this class. Okay, call that class, create an object of that, serialize it using pickle, and so that it is in byte format. Okay, and then send the data at once to the server, close the connection, and just print data sent to server. Let's execute this. Now if on the server side, if I see the print statement which is hello function has been called, that means everything is correct. Okay, so now I will say py. First I'll run the server.py. Okay, so it is printed, server is listening. On the next terminal, I will let me just zoom in a bit. Okay, let me place both the windows parallelly. Yes, so the right one is where I run the client, the left one is where the server is running. So I will do load. I will go to my folder containing the code, and then I'll run the client. Yes, so now if, as you can see, it on the client side it prints data sent to server. On the server side it says connected by this. Now if you see, it is printing hello function has been called. How this is happening? Because on the server side I have received the object which the client was sending. So the client was sending this class, the class was instantiated, and variable is an object instantiation of the process data class. So the client sent this variable object, right? And the same was received at the server side in the data variable. So when I called data variable dot hello, it printed me the content of the content defined in the hello function, which was hello function has been called. If you see the process data hello function, it just prints the data, and the data content is hello function has been called, right? So that's how you can. So now we are able to we are able to receive whatever is coming as an object from the client side, right, on the server side. So this basically gives you a lot of functionalities. I mean, the implementation is, it depends on how you want to implement it, but it is very useful to send these kinds of stuffs and objects between servers, right? I mean, I have shown you an example using the class objects, but there can be different types of data, like we have seen an example like dictionary. And so sometimes these basically have to be sent between, exchanged between client and server. So this way you can basically communicate and send the any object related data from client to server or server to client. Same way like we exchange JSON related data between web pages and server, same way you can exchange object related data between client and server using sockets. Okay, so using sockets, this is the way in which you can exchange. Let's say the client wants to send the data in the dictionary format. So how will you send? Using this technique. Okay, using this technique you will first serialize it on the client side. Let's say if client is trying to send the dictionary to server side using sockets. If it would have been like a web page, then you can use JSON, but in case of sockets you can do like this, right? So using the pickle, you can serialize it and then convert it into bytes. Client can send that, server can receive it, deserialize it, and then it will basically you can basically store that object. Okay, and you can do anything which you want to do either on the client side or on the server side. Okay, so that's, I guess we will stop here for this session. That's pretty much it for today's session. So we discussed today about how you can integrate, how you can extend the file reading, which we discussed in the starting. We also saw an example of like text file and CSV file communication over sockets. So file communication between sockets we recapped in the starting, and then we jumped into the object related communication between client and server or vice versa. Okay, so this is very useful when you want to communicate like dictionaries, counters, and object, whatever object related data. If you want to communicate, then you can communicate using this. So using this technique you can do that. So I hope this session was useful to you in some way or the other. Um Please like this video and subscribe to our channel, and share this video with your friends, colleagues who are learning, who are exploring the concepts of Python. I think this will be very useful for them. So please make sure you like the video, share the video, and subscribe to our channel. It gives us the motivation to create such videos for you in the future. We will be definitely creating such videos, but if you do all these things, it basically gives us the motivation, right? So I will see you in the next one very soon with a new part, with a new concept related to socket programming, and we will definitely complicate things from here. So till now we have discussed about client server architecture, threading concepts, multiple clients connecting to the same server, and then parameters related to sockets, and then we have also done uh, text related exchange between client and server, file related client server exchange or communication, and apart adding to that, we also discussed how we can exchange objects between clients and server. Okay, so that's pretty much as of now in this series. uh, I will definitely, I mean, we will be definitely exploring more in the future videos. So until the next one, take care and stay safe. I'll see you in the next one very soon.